Okay, so welcome to the CPD. I'm April Pudsey. I work as a senior lecturer in Roman history at Manchester Metropolitan University, where I'm also head of history of childhood at the Manchester Centre for Youth Studies. I'm also involved with the Classical Association Teaching Board, which is hosting and organising this day, this CPD, in conjunction with my colleague Maria Haley, who you'll meet in a moment, who is waving. Maria is the coordinator for the Classics for All North Hub, and she's very much involved in developing these sorts of events through Classics for All. And she also works at University of Manchester, Department of Classics, Ancient History, Archaeology and Egyptology. And today together we've put together this day with a view to encouraging the development of GCSE and A-level ancient history and allowing teachers to support one another with input from academics. We don't want this to be presented at all as an academics informing and teaching teachers. That's not the point of it. The point, as with many of other CPDs that we've hosted in the past in person, is that we allow teachers to support one another and academics support where and as and when they can. And this is based around the OCR examination specifications. You'll have seen the YouTube channel where we've posted some pre-recorded videos, which are the basis for some of the Q&A sessions later on, which have been put together with great generosity and expertise from the various people who've put those together, who will meet in the Q&A sessions later on. So this is the first time we've tried to do this remotely, so forgive any blips or glitches in the matrix as we go through the day. We're keeping a constant eye on the chat box, the videos, the microphones, the Twitter. Please, feel free to tweet hashtag TeachAncient2020 for discussion, but please don't photograph people in their living rooms and put them all over Twitter if you can avoid it, unless they've asked you to. This is meant to be a mix of live and interactive, but of course we've got nearly 70 people signed up, so it might be a bit tricky to hear everyone's voice at the same time. So it would be great if you could keep your microphone muted unless you're speaking. Feel free to leave your video on, but you don't need to. You can keep your video off if you prefer. In some of the sessions, the chair of the session will ask for questions to be typed into the chat box if there's too many people trying to speak all at the same time, but we'll try our best to allow people to use the raise hand function and speak together. So as I say, we've got a mix of experience of different teachers signed up, some of whom have experience of teaching ancient history, either at GCSE or A level or both, and others who are history teachers or religions and theology teachers who are new to these subjects and have recently introduced them. And we were asked through various means to put on a CPD largely geared towards those at the beginning of their teaching in these subjects. Of course, part of the day later on we'll have discussions around what further CPDs we can do to tailor towards specific levels of experience and needs and requirements and get people together. But for now, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Maria Haley to tell you a little bit about resources that some of you may or may not be aware of through Classics for All. Thank you.
Morning. I have got a PowerPoint, but there's not a special need to pop it up unless we can. So I'm Maria Haley. I help run the Manchester and Leeds hubs within Classics for All North. Classics for All North has really come about because we have hubs across Liverpool, and I can see Alice Case is with us this morning from Liverpool. Give us a wave, Alice. We also have a hub in the North East and in Blackpool as well. So the aim of Classics for All North was to create a regional hub that kind of spread across the north for the national charity Classics for All. For history teachers, the idea of classics might be a bit new, and this idea of where the boundaries of the discipline fall is quite a tricky one. So really classics encompasses Greek, Latin, classical civilization and ancient history, which is why we're all together today. These are the subjects that Classics for All helps to support. So we cover those 4 topics from primary level up to A level, and we have seen a massive peak really recently in primary Latin, which has been lovely. So the sorts of things that Classics for All offer locally and through your hubs and through your hub networks are local CPD days. So we've been really lucky to have a lot of local expertise around Liverpool, Manchester and Leeds from our teachers. But quite often, because some A-level centres teach Classic and Ancient History, local days can sometimes feel a bit Classic heavy. And it's lovely to see how many historians and ancient history teachers have signed up for today from possibly across the UK, because there are plenty of ancient history teachers, but sometimes we can feel a bit far apart. So that's one of the things that we offer. We offer grants for training. So Classics for All doesn't offer funding for books. At the moment, we offer grants for training. That's usually a day or 2 days of training with a local trainer. And sometimes if we have more experienced ancient history teachers who are really engaged in our communities, we ask them to come forward as trainers and share their expertise as well. So it's also about creating that network between training days where you have that ongoing support, you have people, you know, you can call upon. And in a moment, we'll mention some of the kind of Facebook networks that I'm sure most of you are already on, but perhaps new ancient historians don't know about yet. And the community is a really generous one. Okay. I'll also offer help, or we tend to offer help with support writing or sourcing books from elsewhere. So although we don't fund books ourselves at Classics for All, hub coordinators, if you ask us to do something, we generally help as much as we can with whatever we can. So if you feel that there's something that doesn't technically fall within our remit, we're always open to suggestions. So for example, at live CPD days, we might bring, say, a startup library of books that we've got from other schools where ancient history might have got some new resources or might have lost some numbers or something like that. So we use startup libraries to give these subjects a library presence. And for the A-level teachers amongst you, you'll know that there's an increasing focus on teaching and using scholarship in the high mark questions. So we're trying to make that accessible and affordable for state schools. We also offer a bit of support with writing grants for books and resources. So Classics for All's funding exclusively goes to state schools, but there are other funding bodies like the Roman Society and the Hellenic Society that will provide schools with grants for books. If you need a bit of help, if you've never written a grant application, we will help you do that. If you've already written a grant application for training with Classics for All, I'll sit with you and do it, because it's basically going to be moving information across. So it's from getting started to getting going to everything in between, and it's really about bringing people together. I've popped up on the slide there the best email to catch me on. So my Leeds email is the easiest one. Even if you're from Manchester, it's just easiest to catch me on the Leeds email, to be honest. So if you have any questions after today, you can catch me on there. That's absolutely fine. And if you have any suggestions on what more you'd like from the hubs, let us know. So if we move on, one of the final things I wanted to show you folks this morning before we get started in earnest is a suite of resources that Classics for All commissioned for the Ancient History GCSE. In the future, there may or may not be an appetite or a need for this sort of resource at A-level. The reason that we came together to put together these resources for the GCSE was because once it was made EBAC, schools became really interested in Ancient History GCSE really, really quickly. And that means that if you are a history GCSE teacher who's had this put upon you, there's quite a lot of work to do, and we really wanted to make it accessible and give people a way into teaching the subject. So these cover the GCSE units, and they've been put together by a lot of people who work for Classics for All in some way or another. So you can see we've got Pete on the left from our Blackpool hub, Anna McComish and Paul Grigsby, who runs the Warwick website as well. So on there you'll find source books that we've tried to pitch and gloss so that they're accessible to GCSE. The historical texts for ancient history, as you all know, are really demanding, and that's something I expect we'll be talking about more in the teachers session. So we've tried wherever possible to put vocabulary boxes in and infographics to support students' understanding of texts like Livy. We also have lesson plans on there for you and PowerPoints which are editable. It is more than likely that you want to put your own touch and your own bit of magic on these resources once you've taught your first year of ancient history, but this is really just designed to give people a way into the subject. So I think that's about everything I wanted to talk to you about today before we hear a bit more from Arlene. But thanks all for coming, and I really hope you enjoy the day. Lovely. So is Arlene with us, April?
I'm just checking on the list.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
Morning, Arlene.
If you hold on a moment, Arlene, I just have to click a button that allows us to record you.
And make you the host.
Yeah.
Whilst you do that, April, I'll just be introducing Arlene for everybody. I'm sure most people will have met Arlene before in some context or another. Arlene Holmes-Anderson is coming as our representative from the Advocating Classics Education Project, also known as ACE. The project is designed to help support ancient history and classical civilization specifically in state schools. And although the project has supported publications on language, most recently Forward with Classics, which looks at ancient languages in state schools, the most recent publication that's coming out is a book on class civ and ancient history in British secondary education. So Arlene's here this morning to share with us some of the research from that book and actually some of the resources that the project has been putting together for ancient history. Okay, Arlene, over to you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Maria. I'm really happy to be here today to talk about ancient history in schools. And I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to sketch the landscape of ancient history in schools. I'm going to talk a little bit more about resources available and some top tips for teaching ancient history in schools. And I'm going to talk about the ACE project. So let's start with the ACE project. You'll see our logo in the bottom of the screen here. ACE stands for Advocating Classics Education. And I've seen some stuff on my screen. Is this coming up on your screen too, April?
Yes, yes.
Oh, so
we can all see the slides.
Do I need to admit Ludita?
I'll do this, I'll do that, yeah.
Okay,
oh yes, you need, sorry, that's coming up. You have to just click admit, but then ignore it.
Okay, that's great. Okay. So back to the ACE project. Advocating Classics Education was set up in 2017 by Professor Edith Hall and myself at King's College London, and it has a really simple mission. The mission is to widen access to the study of classics in non-fee paying schools. We believe that those students who want to learn about the ancient world should have the opportunity to do that. And the reality is that young people who are in fee-paying schools almost always have the opportunity to study either Latin or classical civilization or ancient history, and in some cases Greek. But students who are outside the independent sector have very patchy access to the study of the ancient world. And we don't think that's fair. So since 2017, we've been working really hard to level the playing field. And we realized that as two people, we couldn't do that alone. So we have been working in partnership with these universities around the UK. We have the University of Glasgow and St Andrews in Scotland. We have Queen's University Belfast in Northern Ireland. We have the University of Swansea in Wales. And then you'll see we have a number of universities across England who are working with us to reach out to schools in their local areas, in their regions, and in some cases across whole countries, to help schools think about the value of introducing classical subjects, to hold their hand in introducing them to the curriculum and then getting them embedded and set up, just as Maria was explaining. And we do this absolutely in partnership with Classics for All. So these are our partner universities. So as you're sitting in your living rooms or in your homes just now, you might be looking at these university logos and thinking, where is my nearest ACE partner? This map shows the impact that we've had so far. So our partner universities are marked with yellow stars around the UK. The red pins show you the schools that we've reached since 2017. So I think we're pretty pleased with the success we've had so far, but clearly there are lots of schools that we still have to reach in terms of widening access to the study of the ancient world in schools. The blue dots represent teachers in schools who attended a summer school in London hosted at King's College last summer. And that was because we realised that there were teachers who were really keen to introduce the study of classics in their schools, but they needed some intensive subject knowledge enhancement. So Edith and I ran a 5-day summer school at KCL, and we had more than 20 teachers from around England, and those blue dots show you the schools from which they came. So I go to a lot of conferences of allied subject associations, and I guess for this particular audience, you might be interested to know that I go to the Historical Association conference. I ran a workshop, Edith gave a keynote. A couple of weeks ago, I attended the School's History Project virtual conference. And often history teachers say to me, oh, ancient history, I imagine that's mostly taught in the independent sector. And you might be surprised to know that of the 4 classical subjects that Maria mentioned, Latin, Classical Greek, Classical Civilization, and Ancient History is actually the subject which is taught in fewer independent schools than non-selective schools. And these pie charts show you the school types where ancient history is taught. So the grey colour shows you non-selective state schools. The orange colour shows you selective state schools. And the blue colour shows you independent schools. So GCSE ancient history, this is in 2017, this is the data set I have. So in 2017, 66% of candidates sitting GCSE ancient history came from non-selective state schools, and 14% came from selective state schools, so we're thinking about grammar schools. So together, 80% of the GCSE cohort came from the state sector. So when we think about classics education, ancient history for us is the gold standard in terms of inclusivity and accessibility currently. Okay, where we're working very hard on the other subjects to make them a bit more like ancient history in terms of having them taught in the state sector. But currently, I just want to dispel any myths that any history teachers attending this session or watching this video might have about ancient history being the preserve of the independent sector. That is simply not the case. And you'll see at A level, it is even more not the case. Only 5% of A level candidates for ancient history come from the independent sector. Okay, so if you're currently teaching in a non-fee paying school, ancient history is absolutely the subject for you. Now, you might be thinking, where is ancient history taught? I would be interested to know. I have mapped the schools which presented candidates for ancient history, either at GCSE or at A level in 2017. You might be interested to know, why is she using 2017 and not 2019 data? It's because the Department for Education only releases data to researchers which is 2 years old. Okay, so that's why I'm using 2017 data. So here are the schools. You might think, there are lots of gaps. Yes, there are lots of gaps. The gaps, as far as I see them, well, Cornwall is not very well represented. Devon's not brilliantly represented. There are no schools in Lincolnshire. Norfolk and Suffolk don't look great. The Northeast is not particularly well represented, nor is Cumbria. Okay, so clearly we have work to do in terms of widening access to the study of ancient history in schools. We would love for young people in schools across the UK to have the option of studying ancient history, and that is why we're so thrilled that you are taking part in this day today and that you have chosen to watch this video. We want to help you introduce the study of ancient history. And if you're currently teaching in a school in an area where there isn't a dropped pin, we absolutely want to help you drop a pin before my book is published. Okay, teachers often say when I introduce the topic of ancient history, so what actually is that? what is ancient history? But what are qualifications in ancient history? And what is the point? Can you tell me what the value of ancient history is? So at the ACE project, we developed a leaflet, okay? It is a double-sided, foldable leaflet, which is freely available on our website. And the link is below the video. It explains very simply what ancient history is, what the qualifications offer, and in very simple terms that you could give to a pupil or to their parent, perhaps at options evening, or to a head of curriculum or head of teaching and learning, or to a school leader. Here are, in very simple, clear and concise terms, what we think the advantages of ancient history are. What skills do the qualifications in ancient history confer? Well, we've numbered them 1 to 8. How do you get started in introducing ancient history? Here's an 8-step plan, as far as we're concerned, based on our experience of helping teachers do this. Okay, so this is freely downloadable from our website, and I would encourage you to have a look at this. Something teachers also told us when we started our project was, could you put us in contact with some other teachers who have gone through this process? And this is something I think that the Classical Association CPD Day has done really well in putting together a teacher panel so that you can ask their questions. But for those of you who are watching this video who haven't been part of this CPD panel, visiting our website, I hope it's going to give you the opportunity to hear from other teachers who have introduced ancient history as a new teaching subject. Okay, so we have gone round schools interviewing teachers about their experiences. And these are teachers who would not class themselves as ancient history specialists. So some of them are history teachers, some of them are teachers of religious studies, so some of them are philosophy teachers, some of them are drama teachers, and they explain in their interviews what their motivations were for introducing ancient history, and in some cases classical civilization. What the experience was like in terms of pitching to their school leaders, what the subject knowledge enhancement experience was like, and what their kind of top tips are. In many cases, they also explain what it's important to avoid, what didn't work well, and I think that's really valuable. And they also reflect on the value and the benefit of doing so. So we've got probably between 6 and 8 of these interviews with teachers. What we also have are a number of interviews with pupils, and these span Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, and Key Stage 5. And I would really encourage you to watch these videos, particularly if you've had a bit of a bad day, if something's got you down, if you're beginning to lose your love for teaching. Watch these absolutely joyful young people talk about the value of studying ancient history and classical civilization, because they are so inspiring and uplifting. And you will find these on our website, and the links are below the video. I think their testimonies are hugely compelling, and in many ways do the job much better than I can do. Okay, people often say, how can I keep up to date with what's happening in ancient history education in the UK? Our Facebook group and our Twitter handles are probably the very best place to find out what is going on. Our partners often advertise opportunities to get involved with their events, and we push out notifications through these channels. So these, I would say, are the very best places to go. Maria mentioned that we have a book coming out. We're very busy analysing lots of data and doing the research at the moment. This is the title. Our publisher will be Liverpool University Press. And this book, we hope, is going to help teachers, parents, young people, and school leaders understand the value and the benefits of studying the ancient world in the 21st century curriculum. I've given you a little taster of some of the analysis of ancient history. in British schools, but I've got a lot more of that for classical civilization, Latin and Greek, and this publication is where you'll find all of that published. Okay, so I'm moving on now to talk about the resources available. So people who are currently teaching ancient history will be really familiar with these resources. They're published by Bloomsbury. These are linked to the OCR specifications. There are 2 for GCSE and 2 for A-level. I have some excellent news for you, and that is currently they are freely accessible because of the pandemic. So if you are not currently teaching ancient history and you're thinking, based on what I've heard today, this sounds quite exciting, I'd like to know more, there has never been a better time for you to investigate because you have free access. When we're not in a global pandemic, teachers can order a free inspection copy, and you can keep it for a time limited period and then decide whether you want to pay or send it back. So we do have dedicated textbooks for the qualification, and this is what they look like. The Classics Library, if you're not already a member and you're thinking of introducing a classical subject, is a great place to sign up as a member. It's free to join, and this is the main resource sharing website for classics teachers. I know a lot of teachers of other subjects share resources on TES. My experience is that classics teachers don't do that so much. We tend to use the Classics Library. You can follow the Classics Library on Twitter. The Twitter handle is @StephenJenkin, who is the founder of the Classics Library. There's also a forum on the Classics Library where people can post requests or can post queries and questions. It's a great place to be part of the Ancient History Teaching Network. Okay, the Classical Association, one of the hosts of today's workshop, has produced a booklet of resources, particularly online resources, which I think will be very useful, both for those people who are currently teaching ancient history and for those people who are interested in finding out more. April and I worked on this, and it is a kind of one-stop shop for Key Stage 2 all the way up to Key Stage 5, with links to pretty much every, I'm not going to say every because that way danger lies, but very many projects and initiatives and resources which are curriculum linked and inspiring for classical subjects. So again, the link for this is below the video. I would suggest that you have a look here to get a feel for the type of topics and range of subjects within ancient history. So Maria mentioned that there's some money available, and in the age of shrinking school budgets, everyone loves to hear that there's some money available. The Society for the Promotion of Hellenic Studies and the Society for the Promotion of Roman Studies, they're often abbreviated to the Hellenic Society and the Roman Society. They both have book grants available to schools. So I made some notes on this so that you wouldn't have to. The Roman Society, let's take the Hellenic Society first because it's first on the slide. Okay, the Hellenic Society has grants available of up to £500. There are 2 deadlines per year. The form is 3 pages long, and they are fairly flexible about what they fund. So it says books, well, it's called a book grant, but actually they are prepared to fund books, Hellenic events, or the purchase of other teaching materials. So teachers can apply for this. It does not have to be the head teacher of the school. And you could purchase textbooks, or if you're a teacher who's new to teaching ancient history, you could apply for the purchase of books to boost your own subject knowledge. The Roman Society, you can apply for up to £500. It is a 2-page form, and they have 3 deadlines per year, but they only fund books. I would really encourage you, if you're teaching in a non-fee paying school, absolutely apply to these learned organisations for funding for books. That is what it is there for. Okay, those of you who are currently teaching ancient history in schools may be familiar with this resource. Those of you who are not may not be so familiar, but I think it is absolutely brilliant. So colleagues at the University of Newcastle have answered the prayers of many classics education specialists, and they have put together a one-stop shop for EPQs. So EPQ stands for Extended Project Qualification, and this website collates and curates sources for classical topics. So if your school currently offers the Extended Project Qualification, you may have students who are very interested in the ancient world, and they may be quite keen to choose a topic, they may be quite keen to choose a topic which is about something Greek or Roman or Persian or relating to the ancient world. Now, if that is the case, colleagues at Newcastle have put together a website which suggests questions, has curated links to sources which elucidate and illuminate those possible questions, have given you a curated bibliography which is freely accessible online. And the types of topics which they've chosen, I mean, you can see them down the side here: government, cultural encounters, conflict, and within conflict, they've got Greece at war, Rome at war, colonization. Within society, there are things like gender, cultural identity, religious identity, status. So if you have students who are interested in this, definitely direct them here. But if you are not currently teaching ancient history, I still think this is a website that it would be really worth you visiting, because it's just an easy way for you to explore the types of topics that come up in the study of ancient history. So to answer that question, what is ancient history? This website takes you to a few select sources, and we know how much history teachers love sources, takes you to a few select really exciting sources for each of these topics, which I think gives you a brilliant flavour. And the Roman Society supported the development of this website, so we will be absolutely delighted for people to use it. Okay, my final suggestion is podcasts. So if you are currently teaching ancient history and you feel it would be helpful to just expand your subject knowledge, if you're not currently teaching ancient history and you think, not quite ready to jump in with the textbooks yet, but I'm willing to listen to some people tell me about it, on the left-hand side of the screen, the Institute of Classical Studies has done a real service to the field, I think, and that is they have collected together a list of all of the classics related podcasts that they can find, and there are lots of them on a range of different topics. So I would suggest you just scroll through until you find one which looks interesting to you. On the other side of the screen is Natalie Haynes. She's a patron of the ACE project. She is a great friend to Edith and myself, and she is a comedian and a classicist. She has a Radio 4 programme called Natalie Haynes Stands Up for the Classics, and she makes people laugh. Now, given how challenging 2020 has been so far, I think if we can combine this learning about the ancient world with a few giggles, then we're on to a winner. So following up with Natalie Haynes Stands Up for the Classics, I think is a great idea, both for those people who are currently teaching ancient history and for those people who just want to find out a bit more. And now I hope we've got some time for some questions.
Yeah, we certainly have. Thanks, Arlene. It is about 5 minutes to break, but if we have a couple more questions, that's okay. If you do need to go for break on the dot, do just excuse yourselves, that's fine. So does anybody have any immediate questions for Arlene? I know I've got a couple down. If so, you can share them in the chat box, or with 62 participants, maybe we could do hands up just so that I can see who's got a question. Ah, fab. When is the book coming out, Arlene?
Okay, so I checked this with the publisher. We're hoping for late 2021, early 2022 at the latest.
Lovely. And Edmund Lewis has asked, did you say your book would cover Latin and Greek teaching in UK schools as well?
It will not. I have a book out already that covers Latin and Greek teaching in UK schools. It's called Forward with Classics, Classical Languages in Schools and Communities, 2018, Bloomsbury.
Fantastic.
The next one is Classics in Translation.
Brilliant. So I just had a couple of questions there while people are perhaps letting things percolate, because I know we've had lots of resources this morning, and if you've been sat there thinking, I want to listen to Arlene, but I want to know where the resources are, the PowerPoint will become available on the recording, and in the breaks I can tweet resources and tweet the links as well on the hashtag #TeachAncient2020, so they'll be viewable and available for you to pick up and play in panels where perhaps you're not teaching GCSE or you're not teaching A-level. Okay, lovely. So the question I had for you, Arlene, there was something really interesting on your slide I wanted to pick up on, and that's on the booklet. It mentions that ancient history recruitment doesn't necessarily detract from history recruitment at GCSE and A-level. And I just wondered how you see the subjects sitting side by side, and how that perhaps, I don't know if you have the data or if you have any anecdotal evidence, how it affects the way students perhaps apply to do history later on.
Yeah, so that is based on our experience of working with history teachers in schools around the country, and yeah, the evidence is that schools who have got history departments where they are really enthusiastic and students love studying history, but they are also, the teachers want to introduce ancient history.
Yeah.
Where when they do introduce ancient history, they do not see any reduction in the number of students taking history. What they see is students who would previously have gone to other humanities subjects choosing to come into ancient history instead.
It's so interesting because often you think about if a teacher can use history skills to teach ancient history, you kind of make the assumption that it's going to, what can I say, convert a lot of history students to ancient history altogether and take them away from the subject, but actually that's not the case, which is really worth knowing, especially for, I'm not sure exactly the full makeup of the participants we've got today, but I know that some of us will be at sixth form colleges where we might want ancient history as a unique offering, but worry about what it'll do to history numbers. And I
think so for history teachers who are part of this conference, if they want an authentic voice on this, my advice would be to speak to Steve Maston. And Steve Maston is really well known in the history community. He was head of history at Sawston Village College, then he was history consultant for Inspiration Trust. He's now an independent history consultant. He is the person to speak to about this because he has lived the experience of introducing ancient history, and he will very happily talk about his experience of introducing ancient history, but seeing many more students stay with the history department as a result of introducing ancient history, and seeing their numbers flourish rather than diminish.
Fab. We've not got any more questions coming up in the chat. Oh, here we go. There are two, so Sue's just given us a little bit of an update for your map. So there are two non-selective state schools in Ipswich that do teach OCR ancient history and A-level. So they might have just been missed out of the data there, so that's worth knowing. The other question I had about the resources was for lower down the school and thinking about Key Stage 3, because it occurred to me that ancient history might be such a good offering in state schools in particular because everyone has to do it at primary. So really the challenge is to then bridge that gap between primary and offering it as your EBAC, as another EBAC offering at GCSE. So I just wondered, what are the most common Key Stage 3 courses you see in action in your ancient history schools, and what kind of things work really well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's a huge opportunity, as you say, to build on the study of the Greeks and Romans at Key Stage 2, because, you know, that's in the national curriculum for history, and students come to year 7 and so thinking about transition and progression, we absolutely are faced with this opportunity to think about introducing ancient history units within history at Key Stage 3. The problem is, there's a lot of history that can be covered at Key Stage 3, and it's about being selective and making choices. So the units which I think are most successful are, so I mean, there are lots which are very successful. And again, Steve Maston, I think, would be a really useful person to speak to, because he introduced a couple of units at the Inspiration Trust, which worked really well. So he had one on Roman emperors, which was dynamic and exciting, and he had one on Greek democracy and origins of citizenship. And again, that's pretty cross-curricular. So I think that can work really well. But we're spoiled for choice. You know, we know ancient history is rich. It's a really rich subject that gives us huge opportunities to build on what the students have learned at Key Stage 2 and provide a launch pad for the content of the Key Stage 4 qualification at GCSE. So I think the world is our oyster in terms of what we choose to put into Key Stage 3.
Yeah, it's more about cherry picking something, selecting something for your kids, because there is so much available. So I'll try and do a little bit more of a recce on the Key Stage 3 resources we mentioned today. As ever, I will be looking at these links in the break and popping them on the Twitter, which Arlene's kindly managing for us. Because there is also Hands Up Education have a Persian history unit for Key Stage 3, which I discovered 2 days ago. So we do have quite a lot of material. So we have had some updates on your map, Arlene, and I'll pass them on to you at a later date, because we've got a couple of people who say, oh, I teach it, I'm not sure I was on there. But unless we have any more questions from the group, I think it'd be a great opportunity to take a break, get a cup of tea, and I'll take a look at some of those links for us. Does anyone have any more questions for Arlene? Give people a fair chance to type, just in case you're a slow typer. Okay, if anything comes up, thanks Louise, if anything else comes up this morning that you do want to ask Arlene, I'm sure you can stalk her on Twitter. You're often on there, aren't you, Arlene? So I think for now what we'll do is we'll have a little bit of a break and we'll reconvene for the GCSE workshop at 10:45. So if you've not had an opportunity to watch your videos in advance, if you want to have a little flip through your resources or pop onto Facebook, OCR groups or whatever, go and have a little break, and we'll reconvene at 10:45 for the GCSE panel. Thanks, Arlene.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
So Ofqual have had a consultation on what might be happening to exams in the forthcoming summer. The consultation ran until the 16th of July, and in that consultation they proposed some adjustments to GCSE Ancient History. So as you're familiar with, that you have to study a period study, a longer period study, and 2 depth studies. Within that consultation, they proposed that you'd have to study the period study, the longer period study, and only 1 depth study. For AS and A-level ancient history, no changes were proposed. There are also other things that they consulted on, so starting of the exams slightly later, and potentially looking at more optional questions within assessments, although Ofqual were not keen on that proposal at all. In terms of what we're thinking about, in terms of making this operationally viable, we'll be looking to split the current papers into 2 separate papers. So there'll be a paper for the Persian period study, and then a paper focusing in on the Greek depth studies. And the same type of thing would happen for the Roman paper. So you'd have to sit the necessary papers. It might be that you decide to sit the Persian Empire and the Greek period study in the first examination slot, and then when it came to the second examination slot, you would only sit the Foundations of Rome paper. So that's what we're thinking that the exams might look like in 2021, that this is obviously subject to the outcome of the consultation. And the timings there are proposals at the moment, that nothing has been agreed or anything like that. But if people do want to feedback to us in the chat facility or through the Classics email address that we have, please do so. I thought it'd also be useful just to share some of the support that we offer for those who aren't familiar with our qualification and haven't started teaching it yet. So as it's been mentioned already before, there are textbooks covering all of the course that have been produced by Bloomsbury. For GCSE Ancient History, we have planning guides which show how you could potentially teach the course in the amount of time that we think is required. So for GCSEs, it's around about 120 to 140 guided learning hours. We're fully aware that some schools don't have enormous budgets. So for the GCSE, we have provided freely available source booklets. Some of these are in PDF format. They have the specification content listed there. They also have some maps so that people can understand the geographical locations that people would be studying. That there's space for students to write their sort of like comments, so they can basically use it as a classroom work booklet. We've also provided them in a Word document format, so if teachers want to adapt them to fit their own needs, so that they've got a document which is readily accessible. Quite a lot of the questions that came up in earlier sessions were focusing in on what the expectations were in the examinations. So we have produced candidate style answers. So these were answers mainly written by students, but some of those were supplemented by other examiners trying to pretend they are students to show how the scripts would be marked in a live examination. And then given that we have had one examination series through for these qualifications, that we do actually have some genuine candidate answers from the 2019 examination series. We also do have some examiners' reports, and new for 2019, that these examiner reports also include some actual candidate answers to draw out some of the things that they're talking about within those. So the candidate exemplars from 2019 and the examiner reports are all available on Interchange, which is OCCAR's secure website. So if you don't actually have access yourself, your exams officer should be able to either grant you access or be able to download them and send them on to you. And then we have a range of sort of assessment materials that you can have a look at. So we've produced specimen and assessment materials which give you an idea as to how the qualification will be assessed. For A-level, we produce practice papers. So this is just essentially an extra set of papers that would have gone through exactly the same process that our live papers have done. And there's also a number of past question papers, especially from the old specification, which would be particularly relevant to this new qualification. So I don't think they're necessarily available on the OCR website, but if you do have a search for, I think it's A031 to A033, which are the old GCSE unit codes, and then F391 to F394 for the AS and A level, you'll potentially be able to find a number of questions that you can just recycle and use with your students, given that a number of the topic areas continue. Arlene had a screenshot of where ancient history centres are, and we too have this information. So the size of the circle represents the size of the entry of the qualifications. So if you do want to get in touch with centres that are delivering the course nearby and you don't know who they are, feel free to contact OCR and we can put you in touch with the necessary schools. But unfortunately, we can't give out specific contact details due to data protection, but we can say these schools are delivering the course. We also know what options in terms of the optional depth studies that schools are taking, so that we can try and put you in touch with the most relevant people. And in terms of sort of some contextual background, if you're still deciding what options you might want to teach, these are the popularity of the GCSE depth studies. And here are the popularity of the A-level depth studies. And just another slide to emphasize something else that Arlene was saying in terms of the take-up from the state sector of GCSE and ASA level ancient history. So it is by far and away the classic subject which has the greatest percentage of state school students taking it. And I would also urge you to sign up to our mailing list, that we do send out updates to the qualifications and resources that we produced. And if you do have any questions, there's a telephone number and an email address to get in touch with us. So moving on to talking in detail about the GCSE Ancient History qualification, that it has been mentioned earlier that there are some slight differences between the period studies and the depth studies, both in how they are assessed, but also what we're essentially expecting in terms of assessment. So I think, as Sarah Holliday has mentioned, that for the period study, there are no set sources. Within the planning guides that we have produced, we give teachers an idea as to where they can find out some of the information from the ancient sources if they want to go back to the ancient sources. And in a few examples where we think it's particularly relevant to get up and study with your students some of the ancient sources, we've highlighted those with a special book symbol. And we recommend studying some sources with your students because within the assessment there is an unseen source that students were expected to work with. But there is a greater focus within the period studies on being able to demonstrate a knowledge and understanding of what the sources say, not necessarily by reading the sources themselves, and being able to sort of construct arguments based on that knowledge and understanding. Whereas with the depth studies, we have a set of prescribed visual and literary sources that we expect students to have studied and be familiar with in the examination. So in terms of the assessment, there will be a passage or a visual source on the question paper, and we expect students to be able to work with that, given that they've already studied it in the classroom. And here, there is a real focus on using, analysing and evaluating the ancient sources to find what we can actually really learn from those in relation to the questions that we have asked in the assessment. So in terms of the assessment, we've designed it so that essentially there is a mark a minute as an overall ruling. And the question papers are distinctly divided into different sections according to the areas that are being studied. There is a greater weighting to the period studies over the depth studies. So in terms of the amount of time that we recommend focusing in on those, it's about 33 to 38 hours for the period studies and about 27 to 33 hours for the depth studies. In terms of the assessment objectives, that for those who are coming from a history background, hopefully they should be fairly familiar, that they have been written specifically for ancient history, and there are set weightings that have been laid down to us by Ofqual. So we've had to design the assessment around these assessment objectives. As I said, that as a general rule, a mark a minute, but in terms of the assessment, some of the questions are very straightforward in terms of the amount of writing required. So for questions 1 and question 6, where they're essentially looking for a one-word answer or very short answers, that we expect students to be able to whiz through those so that they can perhaps focus a little bit more time later on in the paper when it comes to the period study and the depth study essays. In terms of how the questions are marked, so other than questions 1, 6, 11 and 16, which are marked on a point-by-point scale, all of the other questions are marked using a levels of response grid. And there, an examiner will need to match the performance as the candidate has done in the examination and how they best fit to the various different level descriptors that we have. That we have a holistic approach to the assessments, whereby examiners are only required to give 1 mark. So there are some questions where there are multiple assessment objectives being tested, but we require our examiners to only award 1 mark. So a careful sort of internal discussion needs to take place as to what is the most appropriate mark based on that. And as I said earlier, that we do have some exemplar answers that you can have a look at to see how those marking grids actually have been applied in live assessment situations. So this is just an example as to what the mark schemes look like themselves. So we clearly illustrate what assessment objectives are being tested. We have some additional guidance. And then on the left-hand side towards the bottom, we have the various different level descriptors broken down to bullet points, and then potential answers that candidates might give. So then in terms of the various different types of questions, I'm just planning to go through sort of the 10 different types of questions to give you an idea as to what we're looking for there. And as I said, the question 1 in both examinations is designed to illustrate just knowledge. They're supposed to be accessible questions that candidates hopefully can answer in a very short amount of time. So in some of the candidate exemplar answers, we try to pull out some of the things that are like desirable characteristics and things that we recommend students not to do. So in some of the candidate style answers for the Rome paper, we have given some examples where a student has written way too much. In these examples, that they could have just said a 12-month lunar calendar and introduced a new temple, potentially to get up the necessary marks. In terms of the second question on the paper, and this is something that Dave mentioned when he was talking about sort of how to practice the sort of like assessment with your students. The second question is an outline question, and we will always use the command word outline to make sure that students know exactly what they're expected to do. That they must write in prose, so answers that are written in bullet points will be penalised, and we require several features to be identified. And in this context, we are looking for 3 different features. To give some detail and then expand on that slightly, so essentially 3 times is more than enough to pick up the 6 marks available. The third and fourth question on the examination paper is linked to some source material. And as I said, that the sources in the period study are unseen. So we will potentially make adaptations to the sources to make sure that they are as accessible as possible to students. So in our specimen paper, we have provided some glossing so that the students know what and who the various different people are. We'll also make sure that the languages has been adapted as much as possible so that all students can actually access the passage. In terms of question 3, what are we looking for students to do? Essentially, we're looking for them to pull out some of the features from the unseen source and supplement it with some of their own knowledge that they have picked up through the course to address the question that we have posed. Because these are unseen sources, that we don't expect them to have the same level of sophistication that they would have when it comes to the depth studies. In terms of the 4th question on the paper, that this is looking at second order historical concepts. So these are listed in the specification, and they can include continuity, change, causation, consequence, significance, similarity, and differences. And within the question itself, we will try and make it abundantly clear to students as to what second order historical concept that we are assessing. So this requires a little bit more of an argument to address the question than was in question 3. But essentially it's drawing on information from the source, information that the student can recall from their course of study to create an argument to address the question that we have put in the examination. And then in terms of the final question in the period study, it is an essay question. It's worth 20 marks, and there are 5 marks available for spelling, punctuation, and grammar. That given that there are no set sources that you must study with your students, that we're not necessarily looking for students to be able to analyse and evaluate the ancient sources to determine what we can actually learn from those sources. But if students do that in these questions, that they will be given due credit. For example, with the Persian Empire, that students may be mentioning about Cambyses and how there are various different portrayals of him if you compare, say, Herodotus and some of the actual Egyptian sources themselves. And those type of sort of like analyses in an answer will get due credit. So moving on to the assessment of the depth studies, that these questions, again, as the start of the assessment of the depth study, are designed to be fairly straightforward so that students can ease themselves into this section of the paper. And again, we're expecting very short answers to the relevant questions. Perfectly fine, for example, in question C here, just to give 3 bullet points to pick up the necessary marks. In terms of the next question on the paper, that given that there are set sources that we expect students to have studied, that we will have either a visual or a literary source from those set sources on the question paper, and expect students to have read or studied those and to draw out relevant features from those to address the relevant question. That we'll always use the stem, what can we learn from passage B, C, or D about a particular issue. So I think the next slide gives an example from the Hannibal depth study. So we have a passage about the crossing of the Alps and ask students to say what that shows about Hannibal's leadership. So we're expecting a little bit more than mere comprehension, but drawing out some of the features and characteristics that Hannibal has shown in this passage. The next question is also linked to this source, and we'll be asking students to evaluate how accurate they think that is. And I think earlier we were talking about, in terms of some source analysis, what might we expect students to do here? that some could be commenting on various different things that is mentioned in the passage and saying how likely those are to have happened. They could be potentially, given that we have some sources from Polybius also about the crossing of the Alps, students could be drawing upon those and saying how this account is backed up by what is said in other sources. Others could be talking about sort of like the methodologies of the historians themselves to come to a judgment as to how accurate they think this description is of the crossing of the Alps. The penultimate question in the depth study is another question targeting second order historical concepts. These questions again will clearly signify what second order concept that will be attested, that we try wherever possible to explicitly mention those concepts. I think the only example where we might not use that concept, it might be that we replace significant with perhaps important, but we will make it as clear as possible to students as to what we're looking for them to address in terms of the second order historical concept. And then the final essay question, or the final question, is a source-based essay question that will make it as obvious as possible with the STEM. You must use and analyze the ancient sources you have studied, as well as supporting your answer with your own knowledge, to really make sure that students know that they must bring in ancient sources to their answers. As otherwise, given that there is a large proportion of the marks for the use, analysis and evaluation of sources, that they could be impacted in the overall mark that they will get. And certainly some of the questions that we've had previously at other events is as to how to go about analysing and evaluating the ancient sources. So I've provided an extract, and hopefully that's visible enough to you to have a look. And essentially that we're looking for students to make reference to information that they have read from the ancient sources, that we're not necessarily expecting them to quote, but an accurate paraphrase of what the sources say is another equally valid way of doing that. And then to link that sort of sources to an argument, but also to make sure that any evaluation of that piece of evidence is linked to what they're saying, rather than a generic piece of evaluation about the author. So the example here does that fairly well in terms of linking their evaluation to what they're specifically talking about, and linking it into the argument they're creating. So this is from a candidate style answer that we have on the website. So if you want to have a look at that in more detail, do have a look at the materials that we do have on the public OCR website. Then in terms of moving on to the AS and A level, the structure of the course is very similar to the GCSE qualification. That there is a compulsory period study and then a choice of 3 different depth studies. That we have divided the depth studies into separate papers so that we can target examiners with the necessary expertise to mark those papers. There is a slightly greater emphasis in the marks available for the period study, but only slight. So the papers are 2.5 hours long, so we recommend about an hour and about an hour and a quarter for each section of the paper. The assessment objectives are very similar to the GCSE, but as you'll note, there is an AO4 assessment objective which deals with the interpretations question, which I will touch upon a bit later. And in terms of recommended timings, that this is what you come up with if you divide the total assessment time for each paper by the number of marks. And that should be a useful guide for your students to make sure that they don't necessarily run out of time. So in terms of the actual questions themselves, there are far fewer different types of question. So the first questions that students will be facing in the examination is, I guess, your your normal ancient history source-based essay, very similar to the essay that I was just talking about for GCSE ancient history for the depth study there, and just provided a couple of examples of questions that I've lifted from the specimen assessment materials. So we expect students to address the question and to make sure that they analyse what we can actually learn from the ancient sources about the particular issues. And as I said, really making sure that their analysis is tied to the specific examples that they give rather than a generic evaluation of a particular author to get the very highest marks. The third question, or question 3 on the paper, is the interpretations question. And has been mentioned earlier that we do specify within the specification what potential areas this can assess. So this is a subset of the content of the period study. And we have 3 different bullet points that this can address. And what we're looking for students is to be able to read the passage that has been provided on the question paper, to sort of break down the arguments that have been put forward by the historian, and then to evaluate how convincing they find them on the basis of their reading and of the ancient sources that they have studied. That there's no expectation that sort of the contextual background of the historian will be brought into an answer, given that we do not specify what author we'll be taking the passages from, but we're really wanting students to focus in on the text that we have provided in the question paper to come to a conclusion, rather than focusing in on potential political affiliations that the said author might have had, and the potential contextual background as to when they were writing. That we're also not necessarily expecting students to make reference to other modern scholars within their answers, but if they are able to do that in a way that addresses the question, that they will be able to pick up due credit. So then moving on to the assessment of the depth studies in the A-level. There is a source utility question. So this can be made up of one passage or up to 4 different sources, depending on the length of those sources. And within the specimen assessment materials, we show a range of different ways that we can go about asking that question in terms of the different number of sources. And we expect students to sort of address the question of utility, look at the accuracy and reliability of the information that has been provided, potentially looking at the context of other sources which might be relevant. So are there things that the sources haven't mentioned in relation to the question posed? And where we have a number of different sources on the question paper, that we expect a conclusion to be drawn to the utility of those sources as a collection as well. And then the final question that students need to answer is a depth study essay question, which is very similar to the period study essay question, although there are slightly more marks associated with it, and that we expect students to spend slightly longer in answering it. Given that the depth studies focus on a narrower period of time, we expect students to be able to go into a little bit more depth, and that is reflected in both the time that we expect students to spend on it and the number of marks that we have. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour of the assessments for the qualifications that I'm very happy to take any questions that people have.
Thank you, Alex. That was wonderfully detailed and very, very clear. And that presentation answers quite a lot of the questions that have come up. I've noticed there's been discussion raging in the sidebar chat box. I'm not going to attempt to try and pick out, because all you'll see is pictures of me staring at this, trying to figure out who spoke first. But I wonder if people could, we've got 20 minutes, so I wonder if people could raise their hands or use the raise hand function to ask a question of Alex, if anybody wants to do that. Yeah, Kirsty. Kirsty Churchill has a question.
Hiya. I just wanted to find out a bit more of the rationale from Ofqual with regards to making the changes to the GCSE exams for the summer, but not to the A-level, because obviously my concern is that, you know, although we've been trying to teach it online to the students at home, they have been off for quite a while. And so therefore assessment and that sort of thing has not been as rigorous as we would have liked it to have been. So was there a rationale as to why they wouldn't consider maybe dropping one of the depth study options, or having some changes maybe to the syllabus at all for the summer exams?
Yes, so I think one of the main reasons why far fewer changes were suggested for AS and A-level in comparison to GCSE is that Ofqual's view and the Department for Education's view is that students are more of an independent learner, so that they would be able to study perhaps more effectively at home than GCSE students would be. However, you and others have been in contact with me about this, and I think that assumption is something that has been challenged by a number of teachers. So hopefully a lot of teachers have fed that back to Ofqual, that these are proposals, that things might change, that I think Ofqual had close to 27,000 responses to the consultation. And I think that certainly from what I've seen in both classics and other subject areas, there are very strong views by teachers and students. So it might be that in light of that evidence, further things are brought to the table. But at this moment in time, I think it was very much a case of looking at how much work they thought that AS and A-level students could do by themselves. And I think that some of the issues that we've been touching upon today in terms of sort of like reading the sources in isolation and things like that, some of those things are going to be more difficult for other students, that some students won't have the same access to video lessons than others do. As to why sort of GCSE Ancient History got singled out, that this was partly because Ancient History is in the EBAC block along with history and geography, and that I think in the consultation Ofqual mentioned that of the most popular combinations of GCSE subjects, the top 14 included history and geography. So that was very much why Ancient History was included there. Okay.
Can I just further on and ask another question, and then I'll let somebody, just with regards to the exams, it was just mentioned before that obviously in light of the fact that now there's lots of exams that happen, you know, in that space of time, sometimes you can get exams happening before the half-term holiday in May. Is there a proposal that maybe the exams will be pushed back slightly later? Because obviously when it was AS and A2, you used to get the A2 exams more June time, which gave you just a little bit longer with your year 13s. Is that something that is potentially been proposed as well, or?
Yeah, so Ofqual were consulting on that in terms of moving all of the exams for GCSE, AS and A-level back to after half term. And I think that goes some way to addressing some of the concerns, but it only gives potentially an extra 2 or 3 weeks worth of teaching. And I don't think, certainly my personal view is that that's not going to give enough time for students and teachers to catch up on the work that hasn't been completed. But that is certainly something that's under consultation, that there are potential implications on that in terms of UCAS applications, requiring sort of exam boards to have an even more condensed period to mark all of the scripts and send the necessary information off to Ofqual, to UCAS. So as to whether that's going to go ahead, I don't know, but that's certainly something that has been publicly put on the table.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thanks. Alex Ziegler has a question.
Yeah, sorry, this is just a repetition of my question that was in the chat box. It is just very simply, do you know when we'll hear I know you were saying it's kind of pending, but like roughly when, just in terms of like planning and timetabling and things like that?
So we are expecting early August for confirmation that as to whether that will actually happen, that this consultation was supposed to go out slightly earlier, but there was some sort of last minute conversations between Ofqual and the exam boards, which meant that it was delayed by probably about a week. So there might be, depending on what decisions are made, there might be further delays. But that's what we're working to at this moment in time.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just looking at some of the questions in the chat box while people are waiting to raise their hands. Is there a number of marks? One of the questions says, is the number of marks representative of the number of points students should make? So, for example, if it's 6 marks, does this mean there is, 6 elements to the thing, or is it that straightforward?
So that's only really applicable to the outline question. That's the only question within all of the ancient history qualifications, both GCSE, AS and A level, where we take that type of approach. Essentially, that I think it's easier to think about for the outline question if you make sort of like one detailed point that you're likely to get a maximum of 2 marks. If you give 2 detailed points with some explanation, maximum of 4 marks, and then if you give 3 detailed and some explanation, 6 marks. But everything else is based on sort of the judgment of an examiner of applying those grids, and that's where the candidate exemplars come in useful to see how the examiners are thinking. That all of those scripts include a commentary to give teachers a bit of a better understanding as to sort of like the thought process that the examiner went through when deciding upon that on that mark.
Okay, do you have any more questions? Looking through the chat, I can see that some people have already fielded some of the questions that have come up, and I've completely lost my place in the chat, so I can't think what's been asked and what's not. One question said, what exactly is the change to the GCSE?
So it's instead of requiring students to take both a Greek and a Roman depth study, there will be a requirement to only study one of those in the exam, or study one of those for the examination. And that would be a decision that, subject to the outcome of the consultation, that we would expect teachers to make, and that they would then need to enter their students for the relevant combination of those sort of 4 mini papers, so that students would get the right exam in the right exam slot.
Thank you. One thing that struck me as you were speaking, Alex, as well, is the difference between the period studies and the depth studies is really helpful in terms of some of the discussions that we've been having about overlapping the sources. So it might be the case that you introduce Plutarch or Livy in the period of the GCSE, but actually you can just sort of give the pupils a teaser of what kind of discussions you'll be having about Livy later on, without panicking too much about getting down to the nitty-gritty of source analysis.
Yeah, and I think certainly from those who have had a chance to reflect on how they delivered their first cohort through the GCSE Ancient History qualification, I think a number have thought that they are going to be studying far less ancient sources with their students for the period study, and being much more selective in the ones that they do show them. I think that in the guides that we've produced, that we have highlighted specific sources, and some of those are the Persian sources, so that you can get perhaps a fuller understanding of what the Persians themselves thought, and how they viewed each other in terms of some of the inscriptional evidence, but also some of the evidence from Egypt on Cambyses, because it's quite a nice discussion that you can have with your students as to whether sort of good king, bad king.
April, there's another question here in the chat box that I've just gone back in for. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, got a question from James. Is it a case that if they reach one element of the level descriptor, then they are awarded within that band, even if they fall short of the other 2 criteria? So it's a question about marking, I suppose, and the details of how the descriptors stack up against one another.
Because we've taken a holistic approach, the examiner will have to weigh up quite carefully as to what level is the most appropriate. For some of the questions, there are an equal weighting of marks for the various different assessment objectives. That say if, for question 3, where there are 5 marks for AO1 and 5 marks for AO3, you might have a student who can pull out some information from the source that we have on the question paper, but don't actually supplement that with any information that they can recall. So that's going to be able to limit them straight away because they haven't completed the full demands of the question.
Yeah.
And then I guess it depends on how well they meet that one criteria that they've done. So it's not as straightforward as that.
Yeah.
And I think that's where some of the candidate exemplars come in to give teachers a bit of a better idea. That for, say, if we're looking at the essay questions in the A level, that there is a far greater weighting for AO3, so for the use, analysis and evaluation of ancient sources. So if you fail to bring in any ancient sources to your answer at all, that you're going to be immediately penalised as to what type of mark that you can get. So I think that we try and lay it out as clearly as possible in the mark schemes and the marking grids as to sort of how they operate. So I would recommend people to have a look at the exemplars that we have online.
Yeah. April, you're still on mute because I've unmuted myself. Go for it. Thanks, Alex. Sorry, I just found that in the archives of the chat.
Kirsty had her hand up again. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, it's me again. Just a quick question about period study sources. I teach, obviously, the period study, the Greek period study, that's the one that you have to teach. And then also as well, I look at the Athens module. So there's quite a lot of crossover with regards to the Great Peloponnesian War and obviously what's going on in Athens at that time. With the prescribed sources for the period study, am I right in thinking that because obviously for the depth study, they need to have a much more full approach with regards to the sources and their knowledge of the sources for the depth? So am I right in thinking that if they were to use, say, a source from the depth study for Athens that would furnish their answer for the period study, that would also give them points as part of that essay?
Yeah, they would get due credit for bringing in any relevant sources. So that could be from the prescribed sources, that could be from extra sources that Peter in earlier sessions was mentioning about some of the Attic inscriptions. So if candidates were to bring in some of those to their answer, to one of the essay questions, for example, that would get due credit. Okay,
so it's slightly different. Is the prescribed sources for the depth study are prescribed, they must be able to look at those because obviously they can come as 12 marker. For the period study, the prescribed studies are maybe a bit more of a guide. Would that be fair?
I think that I've got to be careful as to what I say, that in terms of the specification makes it clear that you've got to study the prescribed sources for all of the course. However, in terms of the assessment, that there are no questions where we are going to have an extract from the period study sources on the question paper. So that does give you as a teacher a bit more flexibility as to perhaps the level of depth that you go in with into those sources with your students. And it does allow you to potentially add some extras if you think that's more appropriate, and potentially skirt over some if you think that their relevance is less useful, for example.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that.
I've got a queue of questions and hands raised, so I'm going to try and take them in the order they appeared. There's a lengthy question here from our Wilbur, which I'll try and condense. It's on the mark schemes, and the OCR have taken the decision to integrate all the AOs into a simple hierarchy of levels, but it belies the reality that students don't access all AOs equally. Less able candidates are less likely to access AO1 marks more readily than AO3 marks, for instance. And then it's quite a detailed question, Alex, so you might rather you read it out.
Yeah, so in terms of one of the rationales behind integrating the marks so that examiners only award one was something that was born out from our previous GCSE Ancient History qualification, where we did break down the marks for each assessment objective. And that did mean that examiners were, I think, awarding up to 14 different marks across the whole question paper. And these question papers were smaller in terms of the length and the number of questions that they asked. So if you think an examiner might be 1 mark out, harsh or generous across the board, that can very quickly add up to a significant difference so that they're not marking in line with the agreed standard. So we took an approach based on sort of feedback from examiners that it would be sensible to reduce the number of assessment decisions examiners had to make by just allowing them to award 1 holistic mark. But I think that we recognise that that does make it slightly harder for examiners, certainly to begin with, to award marks. But I think that in terms of the quality of marking, I think that's shown positive results, certainly from the examination series we had in 2019.
Thank you. Thank you. Hope that answers the question, or will do. Sue Barnsley has her hand raised. Sue?
Hi, yeah, I wanted to ask, obviously for us as teachers, past papers are incredibly useful as a resource in the classroom, and we don't have that many papers given that the course is quite new. Presumably we won't get any further papers this year either, or will you show us what they would have sat?
So there's going to be an autumn series for those candidates who are unhappy with the centre assessed grades that they received this summer. So if candidates sit the Ancient History GCSE or AS or A-level papers this autumn, that I think the proposal is that as per any normal examination series, that we will make those question papers available. So there will be sort of an extra set there, providing students actually enter for those. That we obviously don't know how many students are going to be unhappy with the grades that they receive, whether they are going to be moving on to the next stage of their education or thinking potentially about resitting. So there will be those, but I think, as I mentioned, that there are also question papers from the legacy qualification which are very applicable. That a number of the questions that we asked in our specimen papers for this reformed qualification are directly lifted from past papers from the old qualification. So if you have a look on the internet at some of the past paper websites, you'll be able to draw upon some of the those papers either to use without amending at all, or tweak them slightly so that you can have a greater range of questions to assess your students on.
Just to build on that, Alex, I did bring those up and pop them on Twitter on the hashtag as well. So the links are there if you're following the conversation online. So you don't have to all look for them independently.
Yeah, and it's just, I am recording this session, so this will go on the YouTube as well, and I'll post all the links underneath, and you'll have Alex's slides there as well. We're coming up on 1 minute to 4. So has anyone got a very short question they might want to ask? If so, now, speak now, forever hold your peace, as they say. Okay, I think it's cup of tea o'clock, isn't it, for most people? It's been a wonderful day today. I've enjoyed it, certainly. So I hope it's been of use, and I hope the noise of my cat demanding attention isn't picking up too much on everyone else's screen. Sorry about that. Thank you, Alex, for that wonderful paper that's answered so many questions and actually given us lots to think about, and teachers lots to think about. Do please follow all the tweets, the Facebooks we've mentioned, check out all the links. The recordings of mine, Maria's, Arlene's and Alex's talks will go up on YouTube as soon as I've managed to figure out how to edit them and upload them properly. So it'll either be later today, this evening, or tomorrow morning. That will be up. You'll get a survey sent around asking for your opinion, and I know we're in a bit of a survey culture, and every time you sneeze you're sent a survey to ask how your experience was. This is quite interesting for us to see what you find useful about CPDs and what you think you would like more of. if you could fill that in, then Maria and I will get all the answers. If you want to communicate with any of the other people who've spoken today, then do so on that survey and we'll pass messages on, we promise, to various people. Also, I'm going to be, under the aegis of the CATB, continuing to organise more of these CPDs, and I think remotely is the way forward, certainly over the next year or two. But that gives us opportunities to do so more frequently and involve more people who don't have to travel. So what I would like is if any teachers would like to be involved in helping me set those up or figure out with your networks and your expertise and experience, you know, what kinds of specific CPD sessions would work well, tailored perhaps either towards the GCSE or the Greek history or whatever, then, you know, that's, please say so on the survey that you'd like to be involved. Leave your email address and I can be in touch with people. Oh, someone's just said, what is the Facebook group name, please? A Facebook, it's nothing to do with me, it's just been set up and is extremely productive and chatty. It's called OCR GCSE and A-level Ancient History, or words to that effect. If you,
yeah, that's it.
You'll find it. There's, you know, you'll not find something else by accident that's similarly named. There we go. Yeah, so thank you everybody for joining us. Yeah, do fill in the survey, send me emails, let me know if there's anything else you want us to do. So thanks again, everybody, and have a good evening. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.